International Criminal Court is a permanent criminal court which came into existence in 2002. It is a court with jurisdiction to hear genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression. All of the crimes have been defined in the Rome Statute, which is the law of the International Criminal Court. And one of the interesting points in the law of the International Criminal Court is that gender crimes have for the first time in history been defined in this law. And gender crimes are crimes that are committed against women and men. The word gender was used instead of the word sex. Regarding these crimes, the reason was that gender is a social construction that is ascribed to women and men on the basis of the roles that the society ascribes to people.
Oh, yes, I will.
So gender crimes have for the first time been defined in this law, and anyone who's interested can look up the Rome Statute in the or on the website of the International Criminal Court or in UN documents.
I am the founder of Women for Nonviolence, which is a nonprofit organization, and I was first registered in Oslo, Norway. I started to work on gender-based violence issues as a survivor. I came out openly about my own story back from about 2001 when I was still in Japan and I met with North Korean refugee women and men. When I heard the stories of the North Korean refugee women, I thought that some of my own experiences could maybe assist them and empower them into their future. And it is very interesting because the last 14 or 15 years, as an advocate, I also have networks and joined forces together with other women's groups like the Women's International Leagues for Peace and Freedom and various Norwegian-based and UK-based nonprofits and charities. And what I am finding that with the empowerment, the culmination of more survivors' voices, we're able to do more. And therefore, I cannot underestimate the importance of grassroots groups, as well as individual women and men who decide to come out to share their stories. And I really, really appreciate, for us to be able to share our stories in a really dignified platform, because it is our stories that become the basic testimonies and the basic witnesses for those to bring cases forward at the highest levels, including at the international criminal courts.
I'm delighted to see so many here tonight for this program on gender crimes, the voice of survivors at the ICC, with BETSY Kawamura, the founder of Women for Nonviolence in Peace and Conflict Zones. And tonight this event is sponsored by the International Criminal Court Alliance, the International Comparative Law Program, and the International Human Rights Law Students Association here at UCLA. I'm now going to hand over to Sharina Shadi, who is going to begin with a short introduction about the work of the Alliance and the International Criminal Court.
The International Criminal Court is the first permanent international criminal court with jurisdiction to bring to justice individuals who commit genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and aggression. The International Criminal Court, which will be referred to as the ICC hereinafter, hears cases on crimes occurring in both international and internal conflicts, as well as crimes that occur in the absence of conflict. The ICC is located in The Hague, the Netherlands, but its proceedings may take place anywhere. The ICC should not be confused with the International Court of Justice, whose jurisdiction is limited to disputes between states. The ICC provides a mechanism to prosecute individuals accused of the most serious crimes against the international community, where there are no national courts which are either able or willing to investigate or prosecute those accused of such crimes. In many cases, national courts are destroyed or are unable to handle the case, and sometimes they deliberately shield the accused from justice. The ICC is prohibited from moving forward with a case if any country with jurisdiction promises and actually undertakes a good faith effort to investigate and, if necessary, prosecute the crimes in question. This refers to what the ICC statute calls the principle of complementarity. This term indicates the intent that the ICC complements and does not supersede national courts. And of course, that's complementary with an E, not an I. Genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression are grave international crimes, and the ICC only has jurisdiction in cases of highest gravity, especially when the crimes are committed as part of a plan or policy or widespread commission. Besides, the ICC is a permanent international criminal court. It is different from ad hoc tribunals. If the United States engages with the court, it can assist the court's efforts to bring to justice the world's worst criminals. In fact, participation in the International Criminal Court is essential to American leadership and credibility. Although the U.S. is not a party to the ICC, but the Obama administration participated in the first review conference of the ICC Rome Statute, held in Kampala, Uganda from May 31st to June 11, 2010. The United States co-hosted programs regarding how to build capacities for national courts to prosecute while pledging greater cooperation with the ICC. The United States and other states made important commitments on the issue of cooperation, complementarity, victims and affected communities, peace and justice. Thank you.
As Shereen very nicely explained, the International Criminal Court was established in July 2002. And the Trust Fund for Victims, which is my focus, was created under Article 79 of the Rome Statute. And as it says in the presentation, and I can find out if Jessica would like to copy my presentation and distribute to students or whoever's interested. It was basically created under Article 79 to create twofold mandate. The first one is to implement court-ordered reparations. That's type of a remuneration reparations. And number two, which I consider just as important, is to provide physical, psychological, and material support to victims and families. And I think one of the most important things to think about the Trust Fund for Victims is that it really creates an emphasis on the psychosocial well-being of the victims. Now, there's also a very interesting part about the fact that they want some kind of long-lasting impact, not just a one-time reparations and here we go and I hope you feel better for the rest of your life, but some kind of sustainable long-time commitment towards the person reintegration into the society and to monitor their adjustment as time goes. Now, this is easier said than done because of the fact that it takes a tremendous amount of time to account for the number of victims that the Trust Fund for Victims has to account for. And I think one of the best things that I read about this was their importance, their focus on the restorative justice and reconciliation. Now, I just want to show you this short, this short video. It's a longer video, but we don't have that much time, so I thought I'll just show you the first 4 minutes. For those of you who are really curious about this issue, you can go into the website for the Trust Fund for Victims. And so I thought I would just go over and show you perhaps 4 minutes.
In July 1998, 120 nations voted for the Rome Statute, making a universal and permanent commitment to end impunity and promote a new era of global justice that could satisfy the rights and needs of victims.
The International Criminal Court is now in session.
The Rome Statute created the International Criminal Court to prosecute those most responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide committed after the 1st of July, 2002. To address the harm suffered by the victims of these crimes, Article 79 of the Rome Statute established a fund for the benefit of victims and their families, the Trust Fund for Victims. The Trust Fund for Victims is the first of its kind in the history of international criminal law. Through donations from the international community and the delivery of reparations ordered against the convicted, the Trust Fund provides physical rehabilitation, material support, and psychological rehabilitation to victims of crimes under the jurisdiction of the ICC. The Trust Fund for Victims works with victim survivors of rape and other forms of sexual violence, children forced into armed groups, victims of torture and mutilation, and more. In 2008, it established a field presence in northern Uganda, where a brutal war killed tens of thousands and left millions displaced, and in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the world's deadliest ongoing conflict since the Second World War.
For the last over 2 decades ago, northern part of Uganda, I think we all know, has been having insurgency. And there are so many things that took place during all these years. And that is how Trust Fund for Victims came in to provide support through AFC organization.
Yeah, you go beyond go to anywhere. I'd get a good word and a bit of Macadan. You go beyond and go out. I was a cat watch you go to a dog. I'd go out to anywhere.
Carmen, Quan Bill, take it when you wear art. No, can hang on. Take art go. Take Chow Bill, Chow Lara K. No.
With the post-war burn victims, plastic surgery, what we do, we go to the field where we do identification, we assess, and then we arrange with the doctors from Interplast.
They're sending the pictures to me, so I can see them before I come here and say, okay, this one can be operated, this one is not fit for operation, or doesn't need operation. And Trust Fund is mainly supporting them financially and logistically to make this possible.
Chỉ bên nó bùra chú chuyện nhau to, rio to wang, mà bùra quan đàn đẹp. Nãy mà chú wang nãy tất cả những cái nó được chào paro, thế nó wang được ta. Chỉ cha nó là nó wait, chú bolo đồ kete, chú chào water đã có yêu tung pain kete. Chỉ đã chào quan những cái kete, giá có cái kete, chỉ đã chào mua mấy hoa nè.
In 4 years, I think that we have been receiving help from the Trust Fund for Victims. So far, we have done 3 plastic surgery camps. At the moment, I can say the number that we have reached out through plastic surgery can reach 100.
Anh can mà put pe no tian na chi cái pe me wat pu no pa pur ken me chu le tian gang quan be no ngai à chi man ma da no tian da chi ga pu ti mo jam.
As Shireen was saying, one of the basic core areas that has been of interest for the group of people covered under the ICC is the concept of gender violence. Shireen had very nicely explained the difference between gender violence and sexual gender-based violence. It's really interesting that for the last several years, we've been talking about the support of the advancement of women's human rights and to increase the participation of women, especially as stakeholders in communities. when you look at the situation in Rwanda and Congo and different parts of the world, there is an incredible number of women who have gone through sexual violence. We're talking about rape, we're talking about systemized rape as ways of decimating communities within the village. Now, what is really interesting is that because of my work in advocacy as a survivor of gender-based violence myself, it is really interesting and very heartwarming to see that the International Criminal Court's Trust Fund for Victims is now also looking at various UN tools. For instance, CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And later on, I will explain to you a little bit at a time. There are various UN Security Council resolutions that focus on women, peace, and security that address the issues of sexual violence and preventing sexual violence and trying to give an empowering voice to the survivors. Now, what is very interesting is that last year, 2014, Fatou Bensouda, who is a chief prosecutor, and her advisor basically decided to come out with like a positioning paper that would explain to the international community how important the issues of sexual violence is to the International Criminal Court. I won't go through all of it, but you can just like look at some of the let's see, oops, it looks like I can't, let's see, let's try this one. Oh yeah, so here we go, press release. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court publishes comprehensive policy paper on sexual and gender-based crimes. So if you go on later on, if you're interested in this issue, then you can go in and look at it. But it's quite a very intense paper, and it just shows you in general the issues of sexual gender-based violence and how important it is to the International Criminal Court and to the nearly 150 countries that have signed onto it and ratified it. So it's very detailed. It's very ambitious, and some have criticized that the International Criminal Court cannot possibly go through all of it. But I think it was a very good gesture for them to start. It's always interesting to know that okay, the Trust Fund for Victims is there, but exactly how much money are we talking about? The total contributions for the countries, basically, when you look at 2014, so we're basically talking about 5 million euros, which in dollars is about perhaps $6 million. So it's not that much money at all. And the Trust Fund for Victims Board, they do specify that they are actually a little bit disappointed because they were actually thinking and trying to encourage more money to be coming to the Trust Fund for Victims. But at least you can see that, I wonder if this pointer works. Oh, okay, great. At least you can see some kind of growth in the percentage that are going up. So that is kind of very encouraging. Now this is the interesting part, is when you look at the ratio of the amount that is basically earmarked for gender-based violence, which is this dark blue section, and it says earmarked sexual gender-based violence contribution versus common basket contributors, it's quite nice that it's almost about 50-50. I mean, it's probably about 45-55 breakdown right now. So this shows you the priorities, how important sexual gender-based violence is when you're looking at the International Criminal Court and the Trust Fund for Victims. And also what is very interesting is that, okay, who is putting out the money for the Trust Fund for Victims? I think what's really amazing is Sweden. Now, I find, Sweden is very progressive in terms of their work on gender. I have been living in Norway since 1986 off and on. And I must say that in my international travels, I find being in Scandinavia to be one of the advanced in terms of, gender issues, gender equity, understanding the discipline of learning about feminism. And Sweden does walk its talk. Basically, Sweden is the highest, the #1 contributor, and if you break it down by euros per capita, it's pretty phenomenal. Sweden's population is probably about 5.5 million, 6 million. United Kingdom's population is about 60 million, and Germany about the same. So when you break it down by per person, Sweden has an incredible amount of money per person going into the International Criminal Court. And it's very likely that they're also pushing for more work to be done on gender-based violence issues. The next countries are Norway. As Sharmeen said, the United States of America is not contributing to it. But if you just look down the list, it's quite interesting. So you can get an informal study on per capita who's putting a lot of money into it. And it's quite interesting because you still have countries like Jordan, Colombia, which is not known for gender equity or great for human rights, but they're putting money in, and these other countries putting in money. And this is, I just list, in text the name of donor countries, volunteer, and I know that Norway has put in quite a bit of money into it. So Shimon and I are hoping that the United States, might be on this PowerPoint presentation the next time we present, hopefully. I think the two mandates that are very important is, like, as I said before, the reparations one, implementing awards, and the other one is assisting. And just for reference, I quoted this from the Trust Fund for Victims website. Since 2008, they've supported over 110,000 victims of crimes. And I think the interesting part is that, modern technology, oh boy. Oh yeah, that, that about 5,000 survivors of sexual and gender-based violence are indicated here. 5,000 out of 110,000 is not overwhelming, but I think it's a formidable and very positive thing that the ICC is putting more focus on the area. And here is a sample project. This is the way they list their project, the Trust Fund for Victims, DRC, and it talks about the project duration. So this is like a long-term duration. It started in 1st of December 2008 until 31st of August 2015. US dollars, a little bit under $900,000. And it talks about the source of funds and the types of victims, which I think is really interesting, is psychological rehabilitation and material support for female victims of sexual and gender-based violence. So you can tell from the type of intervention that they're looking into long-term type of intervention, not just a one-off. And I think this is probably like the most interesting part of the intervention for the Trust Fund for Victims. And I'll just very quickly go over, this is a section. It talks about the different programs, and it just lists it. The DRC, for instance, and this is also for the DRC again, and Northern Uganda. So there's like these different lists going on. Okay, next. And due to lack of time, I'm not going to go through each slide, but I think one of the important things, and later on I'll go to it, is part of the healing processes I think is so important is to consider the role of men in the reintegrated processes. The reason why I'm talking about this is that, I've looked at experiences, I was in Sri Lanka during the Civil War, and I visited different villages that were run basically by women who were the heads of the household because their husbands or the male members of the family were drafted into the war, they were killed, abducted, or the husbands of the male partner were no longer able to contribute towards the family. And when under these circumstances, under vulnerable circumstances, when the women are systematically sexually violated, like rape or systematic rape, what happens is not only is it important to have the intervention of a program by the Trust Fund for Victims, but ultimately what is going to make or break of the success of a program is the way that these women are treated when they go back to their villages. For instance, I read many extremely sad cases of women who were assisted by the Trust Fund for Victims, but the problem is that their husbands no longer wanted them. The husbands would say, well, you were sexually assaulted and raped and tortured by the Lord's Rebellion Army, the Lord's Resistance Army, so I no longer consider you clean enough or pure enough for you to be my wife. I think this is one of the saddest things about the situation is that, did I skip a slide? Oh yeah, no. I think this is one of the saddest things about the situation is that no matter how many intervention programs we have, if the men themselves are not interested in receiving this woman and to understanding that the sexual violence was not their fault, that all these wonderful programs we have will not really be successful. Another thing is that I'm in touch with Patricia B. Sellers, who is known as one of the key experts in the area. And she talks about the same thing, about the role of men. I don't want to limit the fact that the survivors or victims of sexual gender-based violence are only women, because there are lots of men, also in Rwanda, Congo, who have been systematically sexually abused. So, of course I would like to say that both men and women, of those who went through sexual violence, if they're able to put aside their fear of sexual violence and try to understand that these are people that they were loved before, and they should be embraced wholeheartedly when they try to reintegrate into the villages. Until this is done, we will continue to have the marginalization of survivors. I'll go to the next part of my presentation, which, as I said, I'm also going to be looking at various UN tools that the ICC and the Trust Fund for Victims is working in collaboration with. The first one is called the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination. So that's a mouthful. So when we get tired, we just call it CEDAW. Okay. Now this is something that was brought up in 1979 by the UN General Assembly. And the broader term is that, the UN General Assembly realized that there needs to be some kind of convention to protect women against discrimination and abuse. And this is basically the paragraph. Any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex, which has the effect or purpose of empowering or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, exercise. You can read the rest of it. And this is what the CEDAW defines as discrimination against women. And this is what CEDAW, this convention, decides, would like to prevent. There is also a very interesting UN Security Council resolution that is called UN Security Council Resolution 1325, known as the umbrella under which women, peace, and security come through. And this was basically developed in the year 2000. So it's been 15 years since the resolution was adopted and supposed to be implemented. The basic terms is it addresses the disproportionate unique impact of armed conflict on women. And of course it really, really focuses on rape and systemized sexual gender-based violence in war zones. But what's also interesting about this resolution is that it encourages women or women's voices to be part of societal building and encourages women's voices to be part of the political building. And I'll just show you a quick glimpse of what the actual resolution looks like. Oops, there's an end user from. Okay, there's another page I can go to later, so I won't dwell on the. And there are other resolutions that are under the same umbrella, as I said. There's Resolution 1820, 1888, 1899, and the newest one is 2022. And they're all quite similar, but as the resolutions kept on going on and going on, now it's emphasizing more that every government has to create some kind of key point persons responsible for the implementation of this. And it talks with the appointment of special representatives on sexual violence and conflict, and advisors. And I think this part is very interesting. It talks about advisors, team of experts regarding sexual violence. And this one is one of my favorites. They focus on post-conflict peace building. And basically, is encouraging for more of the women to be part of the community builders and the political powers of the building. Now let's see if one of these might work. Okay, very good. So this is what an actual resolution looks like. Usually it is quite long, so I won't have you read. This is 6 pages long. And the vocabulary they use, reaffirming, taking note with appreciation, expressing concern, expressing deep concern. It's saying that, okay, taking all these things into consideration, we recommend, and the vocabulary they use, as you notice, is not very strong. Because you cannot make people really adhere to this. There is no legal implications if you don't follow it. So it talks about, it recognizes the need, it requests, and it welcomes, and it requests, it invites, and expresses its intention, raises attention. It all talks about the fact that, sexual violence should be stopped, prevented, more redress and to include more women in policy building. But as we said, part of the reason 15 years later we're not seeing much action is because of the vocabulary and the fact that it cannot really make countries accountable if they don't follow this. There are no legal punitive consequences if these resolutions are not followed. And this is one of the key barriers to having more of this resolution being followed. Now, one of the interesting things is that how many of you are following anything about North Korea? Besides the fact that we had like a famous basketball player go into North Korea and do some odd things. And how many of you have seen the incredible movie, The Interview, the Hollywood movie? Anybody here? You're in LA. Okay, one of you has seen. Nobody else has seen the movie The Interview, doing a spoof on Kim Jong-un. Well, part of the interesting thing is that since about the year 2000, believe it or not, I have been very interested in the plight of North Korean refugee women. It's like, okay, here in the United States, you're probably wondering how in the world would anybody sitting here in Los Angeles or in the United States would meet any North Korean refugee woman? Well, the answer was a little bit more simple for me because during that time, although I'm an American citizen, I also had a chance to work in Japan around in the end of the 1990s, beginning of 2000. When I was stationed in Japan working in the corporate sector 15 years ago, there was a really lovely French journalist, a very handsome man, of course that's why I like journalists, who basically told me about this very interesting forum in a tiny YWCA or YMCA in Tokyo about North Korean human rights and human rights violations. And 15 years ago, I was hardly interested in North Korea. And 15 years ago, I was still very much a corporate person. I was a market analyst, and I was not that interested in human rights issues. But just out of curiosity, I decided to sit through this 2-day seminar on North Korea human rights atrocities and everything. And I personally lasted only 2 or 3 hours during the entire session. The reason was that they kept on presenting one after another North Korean refugees, men and women, from North Korea who escaped the regime, were hiding in China for several years, and finally found an escape into South Korea, and were visiting Japan to do this presentation. After hearing these incredible, gruesome stories of them being in the concentration camps, and gulags and prison camps, and the women being consistently sex trafficked to be able to escape, I finally said that, you know what, I can't sit here and listen to one more. I think that the straw that broke the camel's back was when I was looking at the drawings of the children on the walls. These are kids, and one of the drawings was that these kids were ordered to dig these tremendous ditches. Now, I don't know if the ditches were made for mass graves, just to throw in the dead bodies, or if they were used for something else. But these were depictions of children just being so tired of digging the holes that they were just starting to fall asleep digging the holes. And then you have the soldiers basically urinating on them or defecating on them. This is what the children experience. So after seeing images and images of that and hearing the testimonies of women being sexually violated and the men going to the concentration camps with different types of torture, I finally had to leave. But those 2 to 3 hours of me listening to the testimonies proved to change my life because I subsequently, about a few months later, quit my corporate life and decided to dedicate myself into looking at the impact of North Korean women and men refugees and also Far East Asian persons who are affected by this. I'm not going to go through all the details, but what I just talked about is the Resolution 1325 on World Peace and Security. Actually, every country under the UN is supposed to create their own national action plan on how they're supposed to be using this Resolution 1325 in their own country. For instance, it's quite interesting. South Korea and North Korea are divided, but actually North Korea is still part of the UN. North Korea and South Korea, they both signed into the UN in 1951. But the two sides are still technically at war. And so we have this very interesting time. And for media and journalism, it's very exciting because I just heard on my news that BBC of Britain just agreed that it's going to try to broadcast news into North Korea. Now, if it collects enough funds, and if it does succeed in broadcasting in North Korea, this will be an unprecedented situation where North Koreans would have a little bit more a taste of freedom of media and information, which is, hopefully linked to democracy building. So we're just holding our breath right now. But the reason why I keep on harping back to North Korea is talking about the issue of marginalization and stigmatization that many of these people experience. Now, it's very interesting. I always look at the ratio of men to women in the lectures, and I'm very happy to see men here. Because as I said before, without the warmth, the embrace, and the integration of men and the welcoming of and support for the women that have gone through sexual gender-based violence, we would never have gender equity, and we will never have peace and harmony in any of the communities that we're in. One of the things, and this is something that I basically came up with, because I am Far East Asian by ethnic background. I'm Japanese. I have an American passport, but I'm Japanese American, and I speak Japanese, Norwegian, and English, and broken French. But it's very interesting because every time I've been invited to high-level meetings by governments, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, and the UK Summit on Stopping Sexual Violence, these are like very high-level meetings with the different MPs from different parts of the world, including state people from, Mr. Kerry was broadcasting his opinions on stopping sexual violence at the UK Summit last year. I see these wonderful people from survivors from Congo, Rwanda, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Burma, but where are the survivor women or men from Japan, South Korea, North Korea, or China? I never meet a survivor from any of the North Asian countries I mentioned. Does that mean that sexual violence does not exist in those countries? Of course not. Sexual violence survivors exist in every country in the world. However, I found it to be extremely interesting, or a little bit disconcerting, that why are there no survivors' voices from North Asia? So this is part of the reason why I decided to rebel a bit and to create my own NGO many years ago. And one of the common threads of whether you are a survivor from Myanmar, Burma, here in Los Angeles, or Florida, New York, or from China, is that we have a tendency to feel this feeling that we will never heal, we will never succeed, we will not have dignity. And I think one of the scariest things about coming out and lecturing to people like you, I am now no longer scared because I've been doing this for 15 years, but for other survivor women and men, and perhaps there could be some of you in this class who went through sexual violence, is that we feel like if we create a voice, if we talk about our experiences, we're going to be heckled, we're going to be marginalized. And basically, I'll tell you this, I've always had this. Every time I mention that I went to sexual violence, that I survived homelessness, I survived destitution, I was also institutionalized, and I also went through a period of prostitution, I always get this once-over. It's invariable. If any of you ever want to have, especially journalists and media people, if you ever interview somebody who said that they go through gender-based violence, try not to give them the once-over, because we know that you're staring at us. And we know, I'm not offended by it, because I've been doing this for 15 years and I don't understand. But this is the thing. And then, the public's misconception that, and I'm being crude, I'm being cynical, because I know you all sitting here are not this type of person, or else I wouldn't be lecturing to you, okay? But one of the things that when you're working with survivors of gender-based violence, you have to really understand the psychosocial aspects of where they're coming from. We feel that you, not you in particular, but the general public has this misconception that, as I said, we will never be normal. That as survivors, there's something wrong with us. There's something wrong with us, that's why we're sexually violated. That we are not capable of running countries, and we will not be ambitious enough to overcome our traumas. So this is like an unfortunate negative inner dialogue that goes into our heads. And I am saying this because I've been seasoned and working on this for 15 years, but I still have this own personal insecurities. And I told Shireen about some of the insecurities I have. So you can imagine, if I'm doing this for 15 years and I feel this way, what about the person who was just sexually violated yesterday or like a month ago? I'm sure that they're trying to overcome some of these traumas. So if in the future, if any of your work, whether you're working in architecture or social sciences or media journalism or international humanitarian law, come across survivors of sexual violence, please keep this in mind. Now, what I am, on the positive side, encouraging is what I call like a global network of survivors. And I keep on calling it a survivors network, survivors empowerment. And I think this is important because just like in any group of marginalized persons, I mean, and there's a credo that I think is brilliant. In the field of mental illness, for instance, in like mental health sciences, there's a credo that's often used called "Nothing about us without us." And I think Nobel Peace Laureate Jody Williams used it a lot in her campaign on stopping landmines. So it's wonderful to use the credo of "Nothing about us without us" when we're talking about doing programs to encourage the voice of survivors of gender-based violence. And I talk basically about the synergies between the different groups. And these are kind of different groups, but we have something very much in common. And I talk about the crossovers. And I'm talking about the survivors networks. It'll enable global bridge building. And I talk about the healing from humiliation, which I think is one of the key points. No matter if you're talking from a survivor from Rwanda, Congo, Canada, Burma, Japan, China, we're all interested in creating some kind of empowerment. And the empowerment has to come from within yourself, but we also have to be empowered from the social infrastructures of our communities. And on the bottom, I list that one of the very interesting things about the survivors' empowerment is that if, for instance, that one of us have to testify at the International Criminal Court, having some kind of survivors' empowerment makes it easier for us, prepares us more emotionally and mentally stronger to be able to testify at the courts. And I cannot emphasize to you how important it is to have an incredible structure that supports the witnesses and the victims and to prepare them to testify. Because testifying at courts is extremely scary, especially if you know that the perpetrator could be in the same room or is listening to your testimony. And of course, international criminal courts, they have a function and a protocol to protect the victims from this from happening. And I go on and talking about the networking and working groups to openly discuss stories. And I think like one of the things, without going through all the technical detail, and you're more than welcome to go through my presentation later on, is that it's the power of being able to share stories with each other. Like I went through, childhood sexual violence. My perpetrator was military. I was 12 or 13. I was in Okinawa. This is 1974. This is during the height of the Vietnam War. I don't know how many of you in this class are old enough to remember the Vietnam War, but I was only 12 or 13 in Okinawa. My father was working for the military as a contractor, and one day I was at this bookstore, and there was a Caucasian man, about in his 40s or 50s from what I surmised, and he asked me if I would like to take a ride in his car. And I just said, unfortunately I said, okay. So I was sexually assaulted by him, not only for that day, but he found out where I lived in the neighborhood. So he would stalk me as I was leaving the house to go to school every day. So I was sexually assaulted every day for a period of 5 days. And on the last day, he paid me $5. And during the entire time that he was assaulting me, on the way going to school, he said that he saw nothing wrong with what he did, because he said that he was having sex with his own daughter. And he also pointed out to different places that he was having sex with other minor children. And, very likely this man was working for the US military. And so, and so the Nobel Women's Initiatives campaign, there was this brilliant woman on SWAN, the organization called SWAN. I forgot, it was like this military action against sexual violence. And it's important to create accountability of the perpetrators. But many of the cases, I was 12 or 13. How am I supposed to fight against this man, this Caucasian man, who was probably protected by the US military or any military? So, these are some of the issues that I bring up to that, so that survivors and empowerment is no longer just something you read on paper, but it's basically to support women like myself, who grew up to be a social advocate on these issues, and to decide to use my voice to also advocate on behalf of other women, especially Far East Asian women, who tend not to talk about these issues. So, as men and women in this classroom, if you do encounter another person that's gone through something similar, I think it'd be a great humanity about lifting the veil or eradicating the conspiracy of silence that overwhelms those who encounter gender-based violence. This is all through grassroots, here meeting on campus at UCLA, all the way up to the International Criminal Court. Oops, okay. And this I go through, encourage input on International Criminal Court proceedings, blah, blah, blah. And another thing is to prevent the re-marginalization. Let's see. I think I'll skip over this and one of the important things is that I have a friend of mine, this North Korean refugee woman I know, and just took a bit of time. Oh, just about perfect. I have this North Korean refugee woman I know. Her name is Ji-hyun Park. Her last name is Mrs. Park. She escaped from North Korea in the year 2008, and she was one of the more powerful testifiers for the UN Commission of Inquiry on North Korea. Okay, I mean, I think it's great that finally somebody had said that, okay, UN General Assembly, we need to create this commission of inquiry to investigate North Korea, because although we had special rapporteurs for North Korea for many, many years, none of the special rapporteurs were ever able to go into North Korea. Because as you know, for people like you and I, we cannot go in. They won't let you in. So the UN Commission decided to say, okay, we're going to do this investigation. And the good thing is that they made this investigation based on the stories of 200 refugees. Some of the refugees are based in South Korea. Many of them were based in England. Believe it or not, there was a large, about 1,000 people concentrated in England and the rest of Europe who are from North Korea. And the demographics of this is very relevant for gender-based violence because 80% of those leaving North Korea are women. The reason why it's 80% is that the women are more mobile than the men. Men are assigned to factory work. So their names, and they do a head count, of course. So, and if you don't show up at work for a couple of days, you'll either be fired or you'll be chased after at the secret police to figure out where you are. The women, on the other hand, they basically are informal, stay at home, do informal work, and now they've got this black market in North Korea where they can informally exchange selling of their plastic goods, or their cooking pots and everything. And it's very much a patriarchal society in North Korea, and the women are considered the ones to take care of the children and to feed them. So if the women find that there is no food, that they cannot survive on the government rationing, they're the ones who take the chance to fly and go to North Korea. Now this woman has been was going into between North Korea and China for several years, and she was hiding in China for 7 years when she finally got busted by the secret police and they were forced to go back to North Korea. But the good ending is that she is now resettled into England, and we work together to create advocacy awareness. And this is basically, this page is what we need to support Survivors Network. It's kind of, it's not exactly brain surgery here or like Einstein. We need CSR sectors of companies to help, World Health Organization, media groups. I really emphasize the power of media and journalism to amplify the voice of survivor women like myself. And I'm so grateful to BBC. I'm so grateful to every one of those persons who try to help amplify our voices so that it brings us dignity in the future. And I also mentioned below, because Sharina Sharda here works with the Nobel Women's Initiatives, and I wanted to thank the Nobel Peace Laureate women and men that I have encountered who also helped me forward my stories to others. And let's see. Oh yes, and I just mentioned Bertha von Suttner. She's my idol. She's the first woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize, and she knew Alfred Nobel very personally. So for those who are interested in the Nobel Peace Laureate Prize, you can look at this. And I have more information on North Korean issues. And if anybody wants to write to me, please, you're more than welcome. So anyways, I just wanted to thank you for your very kind patience and attention, and for not falling asleep. I congratulate you. And we have about, 15 minutes or so for questions for Shireen and myself or anybody.
I have a few questions, and I do apologize if you have addressed them because I came in a bit late. I very shameless topic. One question I have is the first one. When you contribute to the funds, how much of it, what percentage goes directly to that? Because we know that a lot of organizations, it goes between 10 to 15%. So I wanted to know if...
You know, I think there's a kind of a negotiation between the donations, and you know, usually these are like governments who give like chunks of money to the Trust Fund for Victims. So I think between the board members and those who manage the Trust Fund for Victims and the donors, I think they come to some kind of agreement. So there's transparency, because you know, I'm good friends with the chairperson of the Trust Fund for Victims. Her name is Elizabeth Wren. So Elizabeth kept on telling me that they always is like they emphasize transparency in how the monies are used. So I can't tell you what percentage it is, but I would imagine that it's something that one would consider like ethical or fair or conscionable. I mean, if you wish, I can do some research on that and let you know.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
And I have one more question.
Sure.
You were talking about, you know, in villages and, you know, and these things and education for the villages. I'm kind of confused because you kept saying villages and I think it happens in the cities.
Oh yes.
Are you addressing it just for the villages or are you more, you know?
When I say villages, I mean mostly like in areas of, you know, Congo or Rwanda and different parts of Africa where things tend to happen in villages. But of course you have cities, of course.
Yes.
But I'm talking more in the case of the specific Trust Fund for Victim programs that were like specifically located on certain villages around in those rural areas. And so, you know, I mean, the answer is obviously yes, we address both sides, but specifically for Trust Fund for Victim programs, it was mostly in the rural villages, but you know, there could be exceptions. Yes, go ahead.
Just to follow on from that, can you talk a little bit about how the Trust Fund for Victims selects those programs in different projects? I'm imagining that there are hundreds of thousands of victims out there, so how do they choose what projects to focus on?
I think a lot of it depends on, you know, who the Trust Fund for Victims decides to network with. You know, there's a portion in there, and I can go to the link there. There's a link of, you know, which NGOs, civil society organizations, the Trust Fund for Victims works with. And many of the civil society organizations and the NGOs are specifically focused on psychosocial health. The one in the video, you know, it's like Interplast. They work with plastic surgeons. So I think that, you know, they do an assessment of the victim groups that they need to address reparations with, but as important as that is their collaborators, their network people, as to what kind of skills and resources and, you know, manpower they can contribute to the victim groups. So I think it's a combination of that. But, you know, I can find out more later too. Yeah. Sure. Okay.
I came because I was really struck by the World Health Organization statistic that 1 out of every 3 women on the planet will be abused in some form, sexually or physically. And I mean, that's mind-boggling if you just count the numbers of people in this room. And the complicity of all of these societies in this, because it's not just each individual trying to fit back in. I mean, you have the IMF sanctioning things like the economy of Thailand, which is completely based on the trafficking of women, and these places in Asia where young women are being given cattle hormones in order to be able to be more plump at the age of 12 and 13. And this is stuff that's in the world economy and in the societies. You can't pick a country. Over here, it's like the commodification of women. How many people here are how many people here walk at night alone as a woman? And even think about the fact that we can't do that because of the violence, extreme. Right now there's a phenomenon of extreme, very extreme enforcement of patriarchy in every society, along with fundamentalist religion and everything else. And the violence is unprecedented in terms of a society that we should be able to be better, right? We have education, we have all of these things, and yet we have this. And you hear that there's $6 million involved in these funds. It was kind of mind-boggling. I mean, I don't know if other people felt that, but I sort of felt like, oh my God, I mean, progress is in tiny amounts, but just the recognition that this exists at this level, the amount of, I mean, I know the situation in Congo. I mean, this is, and these are wars that are fomented. I mean, I read your story. It really blew me. That's why I came, because I was in Japan when it happened in Okinawa around the young woman.
You were? Okay.
And the military bases, I worked a lot with GIs in resistance movements in Hawaii, of all places.
Well,
And I would hear GIs go, I got a family of 5 for $5 in the Philippines, at Olapongo, in the bases, and the violence that goes along with that is in every single form. I just feel like we have to have a societal discussion here, you know, about what really is going to change. Look, this is not, humanity did not always live this way. I studied anthropology, that was my graduate degree, right? Most of our time on the planet, women did not live like this. So I just wanted to sort of open up some discussion about, I mean, on the one hand, there's these measures in courts, which I think is very important to be established that these crimes really do exist. On the other hand, the teaspoon in the ocean, right, of insanity here. How are we going to get out? I'm a communist, I'm a revolutionary. No, and I think the society in China, there was a moment where actually women did stand up. And I remembered that. I was inspired by that.
I mean, Shireen and I were having a discussion about this too, but I mean, you think like we're advanced, yet you look at places like Afghanistan and Iran, where like women's rights have absolutely reversed. You know, they're in the Stone Age now, compared to the 1970s.
Abortion any minute now.
Right. So you know, and this is my thing, is that, you know, like I had a philosophical question, like, you know, the fact that there are probably more doctors today, physicians, does that mean that there are less illnesses? No, the answer is no. So I was asking this, you know, this existential question to myself. The fact that, you know, on paper, there's supposed to be more activists like myself trying to prevent sexual violence. Does it mean that there's less sexual violence? I'm afraid the answer is no. I mean, but does that make me a failure? I'm not sure. I mean, you know, what do you think is the answer to the fact that, you know, is it like trying to eradicate cockroaches? The more bug spray you use, the more resilient they become. And in a way, that could be true. So this is a great open-ended question. You know, like you said, the fact that there are more aware women and men like yourselves in this classroom, and like, you know, human rights advocates like myself who dedicated, you know, like full time into this. You know, the fact that sexual violence seems to be increasing and patriarchy seems to be increasing. What is this a symptom of? Is it capitalism? The commoditization of everything under the sun, including sexual services? Yes, I think like the discrepancy in wealth has a lot to do with sales of sex. Like in London, you know, I mean, I spent a whole bunch of time in England, and you know, the tuition. Cameron decided that, you know, English people had to start paying for their college university tuitions. Well, guess what we're seeing more now? Young ladies working in lap dance clubs to pay for their tuitions. That is a sex industry. You know, I don't see too many straight men, you know, stripping off their clothes to earn money, right? But think about it, it is funny. But it automatically with women, yeah, I can go lap dance and cut my, you know, emotions off and earn money, maybe an extra $1,000 a month to pay for my school tuition. There you go, it's so automatic with women. But men, you know, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm not, you know, looking at it. Like, go ahead, you had a question? Go ahead.
Questions, thoughts,
comments.
It's kind of a mess in my head now, I apologize. But I guess what I wanted to say in relation to this conversation is that I feel there's so many of the on the ground impact that we have, that we're witnessing moving through your talk, is connected to really big, broad moves in policy having to do with defense and finance, right?
Yes.
So, like for instance, there's a trilateral military agreement being written now between the United States, Japan, and South Korea that nobody talks about unless you're specifically like following the Defense Department's Twitter account or something, which like really how many of us do that? I do that, I would recommend.
That's great. I need to talk because I'm talking to somebody in the government in London, you know, in November. I'm going to be talking to the desk office for Japan and South Korea and North Korea, so yeah, I'm going to quote you then.
Right, so all of these like machinations happen between like all those powers that be, including the IMF, including most of the United States military. And then I wonder what is the gap between that and then all this advocacy that happens with ICC and with people on an international human rights arena. And for for me, that gap is purely that the United States has not signed on to the ICC. Or that's some of it, right? So I'm just wondering, particularly in relation to North Korea, like fewer documents related to the Korean War are open to the U.S. public than the documents that are available to us from 9/11. Like we don't actually understand what's been going on because so much of it's obfuscated through the government and through all of these really like long historical events that happened. So I guess I'm wondering, is there a connection there? Is there any way that the ICC can talk to U.S. military, or not just the United States military, but is there a way for these conversations to happen? Because I feel like we're talking almost about like different fields when we shouldn't be.
Well, you pose an excellent question, and actually this is something I've been thinking about for the last 2 or 3 days. For instance, what is really spectacular is like, maybe many of you know this already, the U.S. military has secrecy agreements with the host countries or where they build the military bases. They have had secret agreements with Japan for many years, for instance, that, when Japan agreed for the Americans to basically not invade, what is it called? Sorry, I'm not, United States did not invade Japan, sorry, well, in a way they did, they came and stayed in Japan post-World War II, that in exchange for the American GIs to help rebuild Japan, right? That Japan was going to turn a blind eye to crimes committed by the U.S. servicemen, including rape and sexual violence. And this was a secrecy agreement. Now imagine how many secret agreements there are between the Japanese government and the U.S. military and different militaries. And these are not things that you and I can just say, hi, I'd like to read all the secrecy agreements. They're not going to give it to us. And so I think these are the internal secrecy agreements that creates like this incredible, like a black hole or lack of clarity and transparency that makes the efforts, that makes the genuine positive efforts of the International Criminal Court or the Trust Fund for Victims or anything extremely difficult. Because, I doubt that, that Prime Minister Abe, who's working for more secrecy for the Japanese government, is all of a sudden going to want to tell us all about transparency. He is not. What is really ironic is that, you all probably heard of a South Korean comfort woman who were used by Japanese. Did you all know that there are Japanese comfort women used by both the U.S. military and the Japanese military? These are called pom-pom women, and they're called pom-pom women because the way you called them was like this. So once you did this, the women knew that they had to come over. And some of them were known as onlys because some of the Japanese, prostitute women, they only served white Caucasian military servicemen. This is post-World War II. So you never hear about the Japanese comfort women because Prime Minister Abe is not going to encourage them, are they? Because if he encourages the Japanese comfort women to come up with their stories, it's going to screw up the entire Japan-U.S. military alliance. And the military alliance is so important also with South Korea because their common enemies are China and North Korea. But what is amazing is that every time I go to these larger UN, conferences on gender, like the UN Commission on Status of Women in New York, I go to the South Korean, dues and other presentations. It's about like the horrible issues of the South Korean comfort women who are used by the Japanese. But it's so funny because, you never hear about the Japanese comfort women being used by the Japanese and the Americans. And the Americans have passed their own National Action Plan on 1325, and the Americans are scolding Japan for not apologizing enough for the South Korean comfort women. But I'd like to, to say, hey, America, Mr. Obama, you never apologized to the Japanese comfort women who were used by your military government. But that's about to change around November when I go to the UK government and talk to the desk officers for the Japan and the South Korean side. So I'm going to cause some trouble. I'm going to be a troublemaker. But you see, this is history. History is amazing. This is why gender, you look at every government in every country in the world that seems to be a bit strange or dodgy, and they're patriarchal. Guess what? They usually have skeletons in their closet that concerns violence against women. I bet you $100. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
No, go ahead.
I just also wanted to comment, just to bring it closer to us here in Los Angeles. I really do firmly believe that all of this really connects to how immigrants and people from these countries that are adversely affected by violence and gender-based violence are perceived in the United States. Again, even historically. historically thinking about like who immigrates, like why is it that whenever you, or not whenever, but whenever I personally meet like a half Asian person in the United States, it's usually the mother who is Asian. Or if you think about the fact that every time I go back to my hometown, I have more.
Where's your home? What ethnic background?
My ethnic background? I'm Korean, but I'm from the eastern edge of this county in Los Angeles. And every time I go back home, I have more friends who are recruited into the military. Like most of my friends from high school have not gone to college, have ended up in the Marines or in the Navy, and they're all Asian Pacific Islander. And meanwhile, the Department of Defense is like celebrating the fact that we have so many API people in the U.S. Military, and celebrating it for May, which is apparently API History Month. I don't know. So I just want to point out the complexity of this being like not just an international issue, but I really think this is an area where we can encourage like a more critical and creative understanding of the boundaries of even nation states and our perception of who is from what country and why that's important to us. But I just wanted to just sort of localize the conversation.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really true because, you know, many of the Asian Pacific people who are recruited, you know, I know that it's basically for economic reasons. You know, they're not there saying that, okay, I want to join the Marines because I think it's brilliant and, you know, I mean, I was dreaming of joining the Marines. It's more like, okay, I know I'm not that educated, I gotta make some money, and these guys promised me that after I get out of the Marines, I get a college education or something, or veterans benefits, right? That's one thing, but what is really fascinating too is like the political aspects of minorities, Asian minorities, other minorities joining the military. Shireen, you know, took me to the Japanese American Museum, where you folks might know about the history of the Japanese Americans and the Japanese being incarcerated into like concentration camps, detention camps. And for many, and the Koreans were also put into the detention camps too, I understand, especially the ones in Hawaii. So the one way that the remaining Japanese Americans and the Japanese could show their allegiance to America was to, you know, to conscript themselves or join the military so they can serve in Japan. And on top of that, to push things over, some were even obliged to join the military secret service, intelligence service, to spy on their own people. So, you know, these are interesting parts of history that not many people know, but this is the complex issues of being from different countries, multinationalism. But the thing is that, you know, my whole point today, and you're quite correct, is like the geopolitical issues of looking at North Asia. You know, and you know, we finally have this very interesting moment now where, you know, perhaps because of the silly Dennis Rodman, this basketball going and being friends with Kim Jong-un, or this silly movie, The Interview, and a whole bunch of mass media and, you know, collective consciousness on North Korea finally brought together UN Commission of Inquiry in North Korea, and finally we have a chance to, whether we succeed or not, we have a chance to bring this whole entire, you know, atrocious thing to the International Criminal Court. And also because of the woman, including Mrs. Ji Hyun Park, who testified, who told, you know, Michael Kirby, the judge from Australia, about what she went through in human trafficking and sex trafficking. So what I'm trying to say is the individual power of the survivors, or the victims, as the ICC technique calls us, is what is inherently important. The storytelling, the power of the individual storytelling that is passed from the grassroots level, the individual villages, all the way up to the International Criminal Court. And the between stages of going to all these ministerial meetings, Ministry of Defense, whatever, civil societies, and, you know, and going all the way to the International Criminal Court. So, you know, what I am saying is that at least today we have this brilliant, like, you know, like social media tool, the Twitters, the Facebooks, and everything. And I think we should take full advantage of it to support and empower the voices of those who decide to come out with their stories. You know, I mean, this is at least, you know, my simple RX, my remedy, my healing remedy, is for every time we encounter a woman or a man who has like a very troubled and challenging story to tell, I think we ought to embrace it and take their story seriously. You know, instead of saying, oh, that's not my job, that's the government's job. Oh, I'm too busy, I have to go shopping, I have to pick up my kids today, so I can't listen to you. You know, go ahead.
I wanted to make 3 brief comments if I could, not really questions.
No, right.
One is a legal point. The legal counsel for the Trust Fund for Victims at the ICC really has standing. They're able to do things, and so there's been a decision by the prosecutor that the legal representative of the Trust Fund for Victims didn't like, and they were able to appeal it. So it's not just the prosecutor or the defense that can appeal. The legal counsel for the Trust Fund for Victims has the ability to ask for an appeal of a decision that's made, and I actually disagree with the one that they asked for, but they have that power. The second point is there are a lot of local resources and organizations that deal with these issues so that students who are interested, there's a program for torture victims that's in Los Angeles. It includes a number of survivors of sexual or gender-based crimes from a lot of conflict areas, and so that if it's something that you're interested in, there's that. There's also the International Medical Corps for the doctor or the medical student. That's a local program that sends out doctors to conflict areas to be able to treat, and one of the things that they always have to deal with is rape as part of war. And so it's not a very nice subject to talk about, but it's something that they have to deal with on a very common basis. And those are local organizations that deal with these internationally. So the third point I want to make is a shameless plug. I'm the chair with Shireen, we're co-chairs of the International Criminal Court Alliance. We are a local group that wants to have more participation with the International Criminal Court, including the U.S. becoming a party, which is really important because the U.S. does have a lot of power that it throws around, and to have that support is important to us. And if any of you are interested in our organization, come and let me know. We have typically monthly meetings on the first Saturday of each month. This month was a holiday, so it's this coming Saturday for this month, but we're one of the co-sponsors here. We're happy to have Betsy here, and I hope that you all enjoyed coming and learned something.
Could you be able to say your name? Sorry.
I'm sorry?
Your name, but I'm not entirely sure.
Oh, my name is Sean Butler.
Any other comments or anything? I mean, I was going to pass out my cards so that you can write to me and everything, and I'm very interested to know what, you students at UCLA think about these things, because, I've been lecturing a lot in Hawaii, and Hawaii, of course, is in the middle of the, Pacific, and, you have lots of Okinawans, Uchinanchu, and you have lots of Asian Pacifics, but, California is interesting, and I know that UC Berkeley has a really strong center for Korean studies as well, but, like Sean says, I think that the fact that the USA is not concentrating more on the ICC, they're missing out on an opportunity to put in their opinions and their strategies into a tool which could be of benefit to the USA. I mean, and the two things, like you just mentioned, that Ukraine, for instance. So the fact that Ukraine is now being taken under the ICC gives America a chance to express its opinion about it, and also creates some kind of counter strategies to Russia, of course. And also North Korea. For North Korea, it's like the U.S. is one of the major parties of the 6 party talks of nuclear issues. If this case on North Korea is brought into the ICC, this would be a fabulous chance for the United States of America to put in their strategy and their 2 cents as to what they think, should be the future of North Korea. So, I am sure, and the fact that we've now got, President Obama having some kind of dialogue with Iran about the nuclear deals, and the fact that America is establishing an embassy in Cuba. I mean, I am an optimist. I'm like Lucas Skywalker. I'm a perennial optimist because I wouldn't be working on this if I were not a perennial optimist. And this is without Prozac, okay? So the thing is that if we look at the larger scale, the brighter side, the fact that Obama is now talking to Iran, Cuba, the North Korean issue is being brought to the ICC finally, slowly but surely, and Ukraine is being taken by the ICC. I think this is a fantastic chance to move this positive momentum forward. Don't go backwards, but to look forward. So that I really, really would, Shireen, Sean, and I would really welcome the situation of more students here at the UCLA and other universities throughout the United States to understand more of the longer and the more wider view of the positive impact that the United States could have by being a stakeholder in the ICC, is my concluding remark.
Okay, thank you very much for your wonderful
We were pleased today to have an event with BETSY KAWAMURA, who has a program regarding violence against women in conflict and out of conflict, which is a very important issue for the International Criminal Court. Gender-based crimes or sexually based violence is endemic in all of the conflicts that are going on, and it's something that has to stop. And so one of the goals of the prosecutors of the ICC is to also focus on those types of crimes where they haven't really been a focus of crimes of tribunals before. So the ICC is moving towards that happening. Our group, the International Criminal Court Alliance, is trying to support more participation by all nations with the ICC, with our particular focus being on having the U.S. become a party to the treaty.
Today, on September 9, 2015, we had a program at UCLA Law School. The topic was the survivors of gender-based violence, and our guest speaker was Ms. BETSY KAWAMURA, who spoke on the Victims Fund and also the role of the ICC regarding survivors of gender-based violence.
I just wanted to thank everyone for me being able to present here at UCLA. Thanks to Ms. Shireen Shadi and rest of you for the International Criminal Court Alliance of Los Angeles. I was very inspired by the fact that there were so many very good listeners in the room, and that there was very much engagement and interest in the issues of trying to create empowerment for women. And I think that we need to delineate the difference between victimhood and survivorhood, especially if we're going to empower these women to speak their voices all the way to the international criminal courts. And I'd like to emphasize the importance of supporting women or men survivors, whether it's on grassroots level, in your own neighborhood in Los Angeles, versus going all the way to the International Criminal Court at The Hague. And I'm hoping, especially on the campuses here in California, including at UCLA, at different universities, there will be more interest in the aspect of what American can gain from being more of an invested stakeholder in the process of the ICC. And I think one of the more interesting things, as Shireen said, is that Ukraine is now being taken by the International Criminal Court, and North Korea will be taken by the International Criminal Court as well. They have already had various submissions of their cases. So if this is going to be the trend, I hope that the work between the ICCA and myself and other stakeholders will promulgate the interest of more American students to look at the ICCA and start looking at how they can contribute in the future. So I just wanted to thank everyone for today, and I hope I will see you all again. Oh yes.
Thank you.